And let's pull up the PowerPoint. Okay, so today we're going to be covering Chapter 9, which is Infectious Disease and Epidemiology Basics, which should seem a whole lot more familiar than the information that we've been covering previous to this, mostly because of a thoroughly obnoxious virus. We've been living this stuff for the past 2 years. Thank you very much, microbiology in action. So here's specifically what we're going to cover. At least this is what I hope to cover. We'll cover the learning objectives. Okay. I'll open it up to questions. We're going to talk about infectious disease transmission. We'll talk about epidemiology for sure, and correlation versus causation, healthcare epidemiology, and what to do for next time. If we have time, we'll cover the infectious disease stages. Okay? I strongly suspect that we will not. But, you know, we've all been sick. We understand this kind of thing, unfortunately. Okay, so this chapter helps us move toward being able to meet the following learning objectives for the course. Being able to define the key role of evolution as it applies to microbiology, identify microbial structures and connect the structures to their functions, identify necessary components and processes of microbial metabolic pathways, like aerobic respiration versus glycolysis, identify key agents and processes of microbial information transfer, identify pivotal components of microbial systems important to human health, and that'll be a whole lot of what's going on today, and analyze and describe the impact of microorganisms, also a whole lot of that going on today. All right, any questions? Although I suspect I answered most of your questions before we started. Hey, if you think of some, let me know. I am happy to answer them. Okay, so for this chapter, like I said, because this is going to be more familiar to you, I'm going to go over the things that are a little harder to separate out. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the difference between a reservoir and a source. And then we're going to go through the different types of direct contact transmission versus indirect contact transmission. Okay. So let's go to the whiteboard. And we're going to clear our lovely drawing there. All right. So let's talk about the difference between a source, okay, and a reservoir. And I just wrote them backwards, but that's okay. We'll go backwards. Okay, so a reservoir is where the pathogen lives. Okay, so it's kind of like its home base. Okay. Now we've got a number of different kinds of reservoirs. Okay. Some pathogens are normal soil bacteria, okay, or normal soil fungi or protozoa, okay. That's where they live, okay. Sometimes we find pathogens hanging out in the water, and they're living very happily without getting inside of us. But if they get inside of us, they will cause disease, okay. Or, and this is where we generally see, well, okay, I'm going to back that up. I have to admit, I'm more interested in the ones where the reservoir is in an animal. That doesn't mean there's more of them. It seems like there's more of them. Okay? So this would be a pathogen that, say, in its animal host is not causing disease. Okay? Could be a normal part of the animal's microbiota. It could be causing disease in the animal, okay? But then, you know, it's hopping to the patient, okay? Now, under the category of animals, okay, we have non-human, And yes, we humans are animals. And we are really good at passing diseases from one to another. Okay. So there are some pathogens that we are the reservoir. Okay. Okay. So the source, okay, is specific. Okay. A reservoir is general. Okay. So, we've got pathogens that tend to hang out in people in general. Okay. But a specific source would be my neighbor that sneezed in my face and gave me influenza. Okay. Or my relative that during the height of the COVID pandemic, we drove together unmasked in a car for 2 hours. Okay. Okay, so that's very specific. Okay. So if we relate that to, say, water, okay, instead of saying water in general, we would say Lake Lowell. Okay. We've seen an unusual number of people getting, E. coli infections, so they close off Lake Lowell for water skiing and swimming. Okay, until the numbers of E. coli drop. Okay, it's very specific. Okay, instead of saying just a random patch of soil, we're going to say the soil of the Caldwell feedlot. Okay. So does that kind of help differentiate the difference between the reservoir and a source?
Question.
Yes.
Let's say, would like someone's name and then their intestines, would that be a source for like E. coli?
Yes, especially if, and unfortunately we have a prime example of this. Back in the day, there was a lady named Mary Malone. And she never had the symptoms of typhoid fever, but she was a cook. And typhoid fever kept popping up in the families of the folks she cooked for.
Are you talking about Typhoid Mary?
I'm talking about Typhoid Mary.
I just read about her in the chapter.
Yeah, and I feel bad for her because, they put her in quarantine because, to be honest, this was back when the Irish were first immigrating from Ireland to the United States. And so they were lower economic level. And so being a cook brought in more money than being a maid. And so when the health department figured out that she was the source, then they said, you can't be a cook anymore. And she said, but I don't have typhoid. So I'm not the source. I can't possibly be the source. And so she kept going back to being a cook because, her livelihood depended upon it. And so they forcibly put her in quarantine a couple of times. So I'm not sure that we would do that. But then we also have antibiotics that would have cleared her asymptomatic carrier status. So anyway, but yeah, no, that's a very specific historical example. And say if we had a different example, say we kept seeing patients in a hospital who were being cared for by one specific nurse, kept getting E. coli infections, we would go to that particular employee and say, so how are you washing your hands? Does that make sense?
When you use the word host, then which one of these would host refer to?
Host is a broader term.
Okay, so it's the broader, so this is taking it down some levels.
Right. Because a host can be a reservoir. Okay. So humans are a host in general for E. coli. Okay. But I also am a specific host for E. coli. And if I happen to pick up, say, a hemorrhagic strain of E. coli, then not only am I a host, I'm also a patient. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah, so these terms are kind of like from our perspective, whereas host is from the perspective of the pathogen. Oh, good. We found a good place to live. Lots of food too. Let's settle down and have kids. Meanwhile, we're going, stop. Okay, does that help?
Yes, it does.
Okay, perfect. Okay, are we ready to go on to types of transmission?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're going to do direct contact first, and then we're going to do indirect. Okay, so they're all contact because you have to have contact with the pathogen, okay, to become ill. And whoops, that is totally not what I meant to do. Okay, so when we go over this, I will have to admit I am not an epidemiologist. There's some of these that I'm not completely sure as to the rationale for it. Okay. And so I'm going to teach you how I keep it separate, which may not be exactly what the rationale is, but it helps me keep them separate. Okay. Yay, right? All right. So the first direct contact transmission is the one that we tend to think of first. Okay. And that's personal. Personal contact. We also call that person-to-person contact, okay? And that is where you have had direct contact with somebody else's fluids, okay? Usually when we're talking fluids, we're talking mucous membranes, also known as the mucosa. Not always, okay? Not always. And then also skin. Skin is included in this, okay? So if we're talking skin, we're talking handshakes, hugs, okay? Once we get into mucosa, we're getting into kisses, sex, okay? And fluids, of course, are exchanged during sex and kissing. But you can also have fluids exchanged by a blood transfusion, okay? Also included in this, even it's kind of, oh, it's not really fluids, okay? But, you know, organ transplants. Organ, I'm getting the A and the G backwards. Okay, so blood transfusion, you get a kidney from somebody, okay? All of these would be included in personal contact, okay? And it's because there's nothing between you and the person that gave you the pathogen, okay? It's direct. Now that one makes perfect sense, right? Now, to me, this is a subset of personal contact, okay? But we give it its own special category, and it's vertical, okay?
Is that
And
mother to child?
It is mother to child. Through ways that only a mother can pass on pathogens, okay? So we're talking to the fetus, okay, transplacental, okay, during birth, okay, or breast milk, okay? So in this situation, it's going directly from the mother to the child, okay? Now, once you get the dad involved, okay, we're back to personal. Okay. A father cannot give birth to a child. It is biologically impossible unless you get into science fiction. Or unless you're a seahorse, but you know, we're not seahorses. So, it would be, you know, so anything that a child would pick up from dad would be from personal contact. Okay. So, like I said, this to me is a subset of personal contact because it is fluid to fluid transfer. Okay. And it is from direct contact, but it's specific to mother and child. Okay. All right, questions. All right, let's go to animal. Okay. So with this one, we're still talking direct contact. Okay. So if you touch an animal, okay, and pick up a pathogen directly from the animal, okay, I'm going to put kiss in here because we love our pets, but there are some pets you should not kiss, okay, or bites or scratches, okay. All of these would be direct contact from an animal. Okay. So now when I mention kissing our pets, if you have a reptile pet, or a bird pet, or in the unlikely possibility that you have a slug pet, okay, do not kiss them. They carry salmonella. It's a part of their normal microbiota. Doesn't bother them a bit. Yeah, don't kiss your turtle. So
That's what the turtle's for. In case I need to get out of work, I can just give him a kiss and bada bing, bada boom.
Yeah, see, exactly. And then you were very unhappy for about 3 days. Yeah, you could do that. I wouldn't recommend it.
So touching would be like where you get ringworm then from an animal.
From an animal, yep. Ringworm from an animal. Also, if you touch them and then prepare, you know, and then you touch your face and it gets into your mouth, once again, when you're handling your reptile or your bird friend, make sure you wash your hands good. Yeah, unless you have them tested and you know they're free from salmonella. Yeah, I used to have a lizard. I loved my lizard. I did not kiss my lizard. I washed my hands thoroughly after handling my lizard. So
Yeah, but your lizard touches stuff, but you won't get it, right?
well, that would I didn't let my lizard go running around free.
Okay.
It was you know, in its habitat unless I got him out and was handling him. Yeah. So
You should have just washed the lizard so you could kiss him because lizards deserve love.
they do deserve love. Oh, yes, they do deserve love. But the problem is it's not just on their skin. They keep re-inoculating themselves. And he was a desert lizard and he would not have appreciated a bath.
Another
would've-
reason they don't deserve to be in the house.
Oh, oh, come on. He was in my house for years. He was a wonderful pet. So anyway, yeah, so just yeah, with mammals we don't have to worry about it as much. Although there has been a strong connection between periodontal disease and sharing food and kissing your dog on the mouth or letting him lick your mouth. They love to do that. That says I love you in the pack. It also says please feed me if you're a puppy. But no, you just increases your chances of getting periodontal disease. So probably ought to teach them a better means of infection, like letting them lick your ear, which personally I despise. So anyway. And then of course there's bites, you know, rabies. Rabies comes from being bitten in this area, usually by bats. We don't have it, you know, in our dog population and areas because of vaccination. Okay, so these are pretty straightforward. Okay. There is another one that is, in my opinion, easy to confuse with indirect. Okay. And that's environmental. Okay. Now that is considered a direct contact if, say, you are working in the soil, okay, you're out gardening or you're a farmer and you have a cut on your hand and you get the soil rubbed in and you proceed to get anthrax, okay? Or you go swimming in Lake Lowell, okay, and you pick up swimmer's ear from Pseudomonas that's normally living and not causing a problem in the water, okay? You just happen to get water in your ear canal and you don't dry it out well enough. And the Pseudomonas says, oh, good, earwax. Yeah. So this is direct, okay? If the environment, okay, is the source, okay, where the pathogen is living. Okay, so questions on direct.
So if I were to go and lick Mitchell's face and he got sick, that'd be direct contact.
Yes.
Please don't.
I agree with Devon here.
Yes, that would be direct contact. Now, just be aware that if it's unwelcome direct contact, there are laws against that. All right. Okay, so let's go to indirect. Okay. So indirect, there is something in between. And I'll be honest, with some of these, that's the only way I can keep them separate. Okay. So, okay, first indirect contact, okay, is airborne. Okay. So if we've got something blowing on the wind, or if there is time between a sneeze, for example, and when you have contact with those aerosols, okay? So when we're talking blowing on the wind, it's where a pathogen is carried by dust. Okay? And when we're talking about sneezes, we're talking about aerosols. Okay? So dust makes sense, okay? Let's say the source is soil, okay? And I've got a fungus that is living in the soil. That's its normal home. But at certain times of the year, they produce spores and the wind kicks up and the spores are blowing around in the wind. And let's say it's months to years later that I get a face full of these spores. It could be days if I happen to be at the right place at the right time. But because there is something in between, okay, a variable amount of time in the case of dust, okay, we're not able to pin down the direct source, okay? So it's considered indirect. Now with sneezes, okay? If somebody sneezes into their hand and then they say, oh, it's nice to see you. By the way, don't do that. Or if you were to sneeze directly into somebody's face and they feel wet, that would be considered direct. But if you have aerosols that are floating in the air, tiny little particles that viruses or bacteria are riding on, okay, and say somebody sneezes in a classroom and I go in an hour later and I breathe in those pathogens, you can't tie it down to a specific source. Okay? There is time between the expulsion from the source and when I breathe it in. Okay?
But a sneeze isn't gonna last an hour.
No, but the aerosols hang around for an hour or more.
So it's the aerosols of the sneeze.
The aerosols of the sneeze.
Okay.
Yep. Now, this next part, I mean, if you were to sneeze directly into somebody's face, you know, and they feel wet, then you know that's correct. Yes, Mitchell.
So I think it was a while ago, like a long time ago, but wasn't there like smallpox that got transferred, like because like a person would like walk down the street or like in like a hotel or something and like get in the elevator, and then like 30 minutes later, someone else would go in the elevator and they then get sick.
I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't
Okay.
doubt it. I hadn't heard of that one in particular, but yes.
It might have been a different virus, but I think I remember watching a video where people were getting infected by that. So that would be indirect.
That would be indirect. Yeah.
That would be like mumps in Disneyland.
Yeah, it was actually measles.
It was
that One I
measles.
do
Measles.
remember. That one I
Measles.
do remember. Yeah.
No, I mean, the one I was thinking of was measles.
Oh yeah,
The one in
yeah.
New York, I think it was measles that was being transferred like that.
Measles is really bad for this because you don't need to get very many viruses. Actually, the technical term is virion, but you don't have to get very many of them, and they hang around on those aerosols for hours. And yes, we were able to trace numerous outbreaks around the country back to one time period at Disneyland. Could we trace it back to a specific person? No. So it's indirect. But yeah, there was somebody that did not have a rash yet that was sneezing on the rides, and yeah.
So Disneyland would then be the source,
Yes, we would indicate
or would that
that
be the
as
reservoir?
no, it wouldn't be the reservoir because measles doesn't live at Disneyland. It can't replicate in the air.
Okay.
But the source was somebody at Disneyland. So technically, I think you could say that Disneyland was the source. More accurately, you would say that it was somebody or some people, more than one, because we don't know if it was one person or a group, at Disneyland. Yeah.
So when you say where they live, that means where they can reproduce, replicate.
Yes, exactly. Where they can reproduce or replicate. Yep. Yep. Now, here's where I am probably wrong, but I'm going to go ahead and mention this anyway. Okay, aerosols are the smallest misty part of the sneeze. If you've ever seen those very interesting but gross videos of sneezes where you see the mist and you see the chunks. Okay, chunks are droplets. Relatively speaking, microbiologically speaking, they're huge. Okay. And they fall out of the air on average after about 3 feet, 1 meter. Okay. My understanding was that droplet transmission was considered direct because they fall out of the air so quickly that it's somebody sneezing in your face and you feel wet. Okay. But in the book, it says it's indirect. So we're going to go with what the book says. But I'm sorry, I always understood this was considered direct. But and that's why during this lovely COVID pandemic, social distancing, 6 feet. Okay, so that is okay. You've got 2 people that are. Oh, let's get them further apart. That ain't 6 feet. Okay, if you're 6 feet apart and you're both talking and you've got droplets coming out of your mouth. And they're coming down at the 3 feet mark for both of you. Okay, that's why we say 6 feet total. Because it's landing directly in between you. Okay. Aerosols, 6 feet is, oh, I put 3 meters. That would be a little excessive. That would be 9 feet. Okay. You know, aerosols, social distancing doesn't help because it's indirect. So anyway, my understanding was that droplets were direct, but that's not what the book says. So we'll go with the book. Okay, questions. Question as to why airborne is considered indirect, whereas getting fluids directly from somebody is considered personal, direct contact.
So
it's
using
only-
Mitchell. Oh, go ahead, Mitchell.
So would it only be like airborne, or like, let's say if someone like sneezes on their hand and they touch a door handle, and then someone else then touches the door handle later, that would also be indirect?
That would also be indirect, and that leads into vehicle. But
Oh,
before we go into that, okay, I can never spell this because it has an obnoxious C in it. Should be a K. Yes, Isaac, you have a question.
Just using a Mitchell as an example to get, again, just to make sure I got this. So if I sneeze in Mitchell's face point blank, that's direct contact. But if I'm at a park and let's say I sneeze and then Mitchell comes and goes down the slide where I sneeze and gets it, that's indirect contact.
I would say yes. Because if
All
you
right.
sneeze point blank and you feel wet, you know, then technically there's no droplets. The droplets got directly onto poor Mitchell. So does that help?
Yeah, so the droplets is what makes it direct or not direct contact or indirect
Well,
contact.
like I said, the book says that droplets are considered indirect. And I think it's because there's 3 feet distance between people. But if it's right there and you're getting fluid right on, you know, like if somebody spits in your face, as far as I'm concerned, that's direct contact. But I could be wrong. So on the test, I will not have a question about droplets. Unless yes, because like I said, I was sure that it was direct, but the book says it's indirect. So unless I ask you at what distance the droplets will fall out of the air, you should know that one from the COVID nonsense that's been going on. By the way, the nonsense is the virus. Anyway.
And vehicle is spelled VEHICLE.
I tell you, English drives me crazy. It's not that I speak another language or am able to write another language. Yeah,
If it makes you feel
I
better.
left the age out. There we go. That looks better, doesn't it?
There you go.
If it makes you feel better, I was working at the hospital and a patient corrected me on how to spell Saturday because apparently I spelled Saturday wrong.
Did you put an E in it where it doesn't go?
Yeah, I put an A instead of a U, I think, or
Yeah,
something like
see?
that.
We don't spell it how it sounds, and so
Thursday.
that-
That's when I get wrong.
yeah, Thursday.
Wednesday.
Wednesdays. I still can't spell it.
I'm almost
I'm
40 years
sorry.
old and I have to say Wednesday every time I spell it.
I know how to spell every single day of the week now because of work.
Exactly, because people who are better at spelling than us know how to spell these things. Yeah, the problem is we don't spell it how it's pronounced. We get you know, it's wonderful that we borrow words from all sorts of languages because you know there's a wealth of wonderful words out there. But then we change the pronunciation without changing the spelling. You just shouldn't change the pronunciation if we're not going to change the spelling. But anyway, getting
Or
back
keep
to the
this, or keep the spelling the same and have different definitions.
oh, see, there we go. Yeah.
I think we should just go back to like hieroglyphs and stuff. Just draw pictures.
Oh, but you'd spend 50 years learning all of the hieroglyphs. That's why the scribe class was upper classes, because they had the education, the money to get the education to learn them all. Here we've only got to learn what, 20 letters, 50 million sounds, but you can get by with that. All right, going back to vehicle transmission. So with Mitchell's example of sneezing into your hand, you touch a doorknob and then somebody else touches it later and they rub their eyes and they've just inoculated themselves. Okay. So vehicle is anything that carries the pathogen. Now I put that in quotes because the doorknob is stationary. Okay. And by the way, if it's an inanimate, okay, non-living surface, we call it a fomite. Okay. So doorknobs, hypodermic needles, surgical equipment, okay, drinking glasses, utensils, okay, all of these can be fomites, okay, inanimate objects that can be contaminated from the source, which in all of these examples have been a person, and then somebody else, okay, contacts that fomite and picks up the pathogen, okay.
Did you say fomite is an F?
Yeah, it's an F.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that doesn't look like an F, but really that's an F. Yeah.
So if like somehow a turtle goes and touches a doorknob and then I touch the doorknob and get salmonella, is that still like the indirect contact, or does it have to be a human to human?
No, it can be indirect from an animal. Yeah. Say, so it'd be a bit of a stretch for the,
Like your
for the
lizard?
turtle. Yeah, so my lizard crawling around the house and crawling up the wall and then sitting on the doorknob and then scuttling off, and yeah, definitely. Yeah, so all of those would be considered fomite transmission because the vehicle, the fomite, the inanimate object, was between the source and the patient. So that makes it indirect. Okay. Now, also in this category, okay, we have food. Okay. So we had a case of hemorrhagic E. coli outbreak, and it was getting to be several years ago now, but it was from cantaloupes. Okay. And it was traced back to a farm that did, and I'm not dissing organic, okay, but they were using untreated manure to fertilize their cantaloupes, okay? And cows can carry hemorrhagic E. coli. So the source were the cows that provided the manure. The manure got on the cantaloupes, okay? And then the cantaloupes, people ate it and they got hemorrhagic E. coli. Because it's really
Wasn't
hard
there
to
an apple story you told us too about that?
There is the apple story where there was, and by the way, this is a lovely idea. Have your cows keep the weeds down in your orchard. Okay, just if that happens and you drop an apple in your orchard, it doesn't matter if it landed in a pile of poop or not. Do not put that into your unpasteurized apple cider. Which, by the way, I am enough of a microbiologist that I cannot drink unpasteurized fluids because I would be the one that would get hemorrhagic E. coli and everybody else was fine. So, but you can see how that would be indirect, okay? Because the source was not the food, okay? The source contaminated the food. Now, the microbes did multiply in the food, but that's not normally where they live. They're just taking advantage of that, okay? It's also, the reason why we tell people not to leave potato salad out for long periods of time, okay? Raw eggs in the mayonnaise combined with mustard for whatever reason is a good way to have Staph aureus and E. coli and who knows what else multiply in your potato salad and make people sick. Okay. So we call this foodborne. Okay. And then we also have waterborne. And this is the one that it can be kind of tricky keeping waterborne separate from water as an environmental source. Okay. For environmental, it's if the pathogen normally lives in the water. Okay. If it's waterborne, they normally live in a person. Okay, let's say this poor person here, okay, has cholera. Okay. Uncontrollable diarrhea. Okay, and let's say that gets into a water source. It goes far enough downstream that we can't tell who originally pooped in the water. Okay, and this person comes and gets a drink and gets cholera. Okay. Okay, how are we doing on that one?
I
So
just kind of
water-
hate it when I can't find out who pooped in my water.
I know. Yeah, don't poop in the water. And by the way, do not empty your RV into the stream where you're camping. Go to a prescribed dump site. I say that because one of my friends was telling me when she was camping and saw toilet paper floating down the stream. It's like, okay, it's time to leave.
So you can do it in the woods, but not in the water.
And make sure you dig your hole on deep enough. Yeah. We don't want runoff into the water. From there, it becomes waterborne again. Yeah. Yeah, it's been a long
So
time
sewage-
since I've done roughing. Yeah.
Sewage would be a waterborne.
Yes.
Okay.
If you go from a person to water to another person. If you go from a person directly to the water with not another person involved, then it's direct.
Okay.
Okay, I have a slightly more legit question this time.
Sure.
So let's say there's this body of water, right? And it's doing fine, not contaminated. But then it gets contaminated, and then the bacteria is like, you know what? I like it here. I'm gonna stay and can like survive in it. Would that turn it from an indirect contact to a direct contact?
There are some pathogens that do that. So leptospirilliosis is caused by a bacterium that the genus name is Leptospirillum, I think. And it will grow very happily either in the kidneys of deer, beaver, and who knows what else. But it will also replicate in water. And so it's one of those that it's on the border. Sometimes it's considered environmental. Sometimes it's considered waterborne. And it depends upon how recently the deer urinated in Lake Wolf.
So if it decided to live in the water, like you'd said,
Mhm.
then now that water is the reservoir because that's where it's replicating and
Yeah.
reproducing and hanging out and okay.
Exactly. But if the reservoir is the kidneys of a population of deer, then it would be indirect until the leptospirillum is able to live and replicate in the water. Yeah, that's where it gets a little tricky when you're talking about animals that live in the water. So for example, beavers. Okay, beavers carry Giardia, which is a protozoa that will cause diarrhea, long-term diarrhea, because it's a eukaryote, and it takes your body months to figure out where the problem is, because it's not like a bacterium where it's like, okay, you're obviously not a part of this body. So to my mind, I'm not exactly sure if that would be considered environmental or waterborne. Because the beavers are living in the water and they're putting Giardia in the water all the time. But it would be considered, I'm sure, waterborne because Giardia exists in a dormant cyst in the water. And so it's just waiting to be swallowed by somebody else. But see, that's where, you know, I've got to stop and draw it out myself. Just because I'm not an epidemiologist. Yeah. Okay, we've got one more indirect. This one is very straightforward, to my mind anyway. Okay, and we're going to do vectors. Okay, vectors are bugs. And my entomologist friends would have a fit me calling them bugs because not all of them are actually bugs, but you guys know what I mean. Okay, so a vector, okay, is indirect because they're carrying the pathogen from place to place, okay? So there are, and you know what, I'm going to get a whole new screen because we've got to give the vectors enough room. Okay, so there are, oh, go ahead.
Just throwing this out there, like bugs, you also are like including ticks and spiders that are arachnids, right?
Yes.
Coolio.
Yep. Because they're invertebrates that have multiple legs. Therefore, in the popular vernacular, they're all bugs. Even though you are right, arachnids are never going to be in the insect class bugs. Yeah, bugs are actually a subset of beetles. So none of these are actually bugs. So, and we've got two different kinds. We've got, I'm going to do mechanical first. And I think I've got way too many C's in there. Let me try this again. There we go. That looks better. Nope, I'm doing it again. That doesn't look right either. All right, mechanical, we'll just go with that with spelling. And then biological, I know how to spell that.
You're just missing an A in mechanical. Change
Am
the
I
first
just-
I to an A. Can.
You know what? Just sound it out and then act confident, and $10 says no one will notice.
How's
There
that?
you go.
Well, sending it out doesn't help. Oh, well, and then biological. There we go. Like I said, I know how to spell biological. Comes from Latin. All right, I can do the Latin ones. All right, so mechanical. Okay, mechanical is where the pathogen is carried. Okay, but it doesn't reproduce. Okay. But biological is where the pathogen is carried. Okay. And it does reproduce. Okay. In the vector. Okay. Here are two different examples. Okay. Here is a mechanical vector. Okay. So I've got a pile of poop here. Okay. And I've got a fly that says, oh, good. This is a perfect place to lay my eggs. So it comes around, it dances around on the poop, okay, lays its eggs. It is assuring the life of its little larvae that are going to hatch out, okay? And then it says, oh, look, potato salad. By the way, I used the potato salad example because it came from one of my favorite authors. So anyway, this example comes from one of my favorite authors. So anyway, the fly goes from the poop pile, lands on the potato salad and does a little dance and eats your potato salad. and you come back an hour later and you become ill from the poop bacteria that the flies carried over to your potato salad. Okay. So there is no reproduction in between, or if there was reproduction happening, it was happening briefly in the potato salad. Okay. So flies. Flies are mechanical vectors. Okay. Because
think-
of their, oh, go ahead.
My bad. I was just making a dumb comment. I said I think that's justified for not eating all your potato salad in one sitting.
Yeah, you should eat it all in one sitting, and don't leave it sitting out and put a cover on it and kill flies as many as you possibly can. Kill them all. I have a thing against flies. So,
The flies will poop on your food when you're trying to eat it.
they will, yes.
I personally have a thing against ticks. I hate those.
Oh, ticks are terrible. Let's put ticks down here.
And terrifying.
Yes. I tell you, I cannot think of a good reason to keep ticks around. Kill them all. But they're biological. They're an example of carrying the pathogen within them, and the pathogen replicates within them. Okay. So let's talk about Lyme disease. Okay. So here we have a cute little mouse. Let's get Mickey up here. Actually, Mickey is a Hollywood mouse. He would not ever come in contact with Borrelia burgdorferi, which, by the way, is one of the more fun words to names to say. Okay, so we've got some wild mice. Okay, and sometimes deer get into this. But the ticks will land on them, suck their blood, swell up to the size of grapes. Okay, then they go off and lay their eggs. Okay, the eggs hatch into little nymphs, and then they land on another mouse and pass the Lyme disease bacterium into the new mouse. Okay, and so we have a cycle here. Okay, where the ticks are in between. Okay. Mice would be considered the reservoir. Okay. And the ticks would be considered the vector. Okay. So indirect. Now the problem occurs is where you have the person coming along, the tick, okay, the tick nymph, okay, comes over here, lands on the person, bites them, passes Lyme disease carrying or causing bacteria into the person. Okay. But because the bacterium replicates in both the adult and the baby ticks in between the mice, okay, usually we do not have person or a transfer of the ticks from one person to another. Okay. Okay, so we generally do not see that. But we do see it going in the reservoir, and it can hop accidentally into the people. Okay. But because the bacterium is replicating within the tick, it's considered biological. Yeah.
So what about the mouse species? Because I know my species has pathogens that are bad for humans. What would that be?
That would be indirect airborne. Okay. So
Airborne,
let's say,
even though you touch? Don't you have to touch the poop?
not necessarily.
No. Okay.
So we get some little mouse raisins here, and we've got hantavirus in it. They can, or urine, and the hantavirus can survive in that, which is surprising because we're talking an enveloped virus. Then I come along and I sweep them up, and I get little particles of poop, and I breathe it in, and the virus gets into my lungs and causes a hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. Yeah, so that would be indirect because the poop and the urine has been sitting around. Now you can get it directly from handling wild mice that unfortunately I know from personal experience, they will poop in fright. And that would be considered direct if you had contact with the fresh feces while you're accidentally squeezing the mouse. Okay, now I have to tell you that story. By the way, we have our mouse problem under control over at NCAB, but during the fall, mice will come into buildings. It's getting cold. The food resources are dropping, and they're having the last litter of the year, and they're getting pushed out. And so these young mice are having to find their own territories, and why not go into a house, especially if you have food there. So anyway, during the fall, we routinely tell people, do not keep food in your desks. Okay. But anyway, I was, and I did not keep food at my desk, but I was eating lunch and I had an ear of corn that I was going to microwave later and have some lovely fresh corn on the cob. But anyway, I had, a sandwich that I was eating, and then I had put my open lunch bag into my drawer and closed it. Well, later I pull out the bag that is containing, I reached in to grab the bag that had the corn, and I felt something through the bag that did not feel like corn. And I look in, and this poor little frightened field mouse is running frantically around the bag during the 20 minutes that I was eating my sandwich and also doing work. It had nibbled through my plastic bag to get in to get at the corn. And so this mean monster had reached in and squeezed it. And yes, it pooped in the bag. And then when I lifted up the bag, and it squirted out the hole, and we were all chasing it, and it was leaving fresh droppings all over the place. And I disinfected the tar out of the place. Let me tell you, I was not going to get hantavirus from that poor little mouth that ended up getting caught in the trap the next day. So, so yeah, that would have been direct transmission. Yeah, that would have been direct. But if we hadn't, if later somebody goes and vacuums, mouse droppings that had gotten underneath, this, that, or the other, and I didn't see it right then and dispose of them appropriately, and the particles got kicked up, that would be indirect. Okay. Yeah, so that was my most recent close encounter of the mouse kind.
But the poop itself would be direct contact?
Well, because I was having direct contact with the mouse, and so it wouldn't necessarily, it could have been from the poop, but it was more likely from, just having, mice don't have a real tight sphincter, and so and also as part of mouse society, they leave urine trails for other mice to follow in the dark. And so they tend to have whatever's in their intestines and in their bladders all over their fur too.
Okay.
Yeah.
But indirect contact would be when the aerosols get like in the air.
Right, right.
Okay.
Aerosols, particles, poop, dried urine particles. Yeah. Because there's been time between contact with the mouse and contact with whatever's carrying the pathogen.
Okay. And the bacteria you were talking about can grow on the poop, which is why it's a biological?
No, biological is only when we've got, say, a tick or a flea or a mosquito. I have to put mosquitoes up here because they are the worst. Okay. The pathogen is replicating within these invertebrate animals as a part of their life cycle.
Okay.
Yeah. Whereas the poop would not be biological. I mean, it comes from it's part of biology, but it would not be a biological vector. Okay. Now, with mosquitoes, you can go from human to human. Okay. Malaria, okay, has a cycle where it goes from person to person. Okay, I have a person that has malaria, that makes them smell extra delicious to female mosquitoes, okay, that land, drink their blood. It replicates in the body of the mosquito, okay. They go lay their eggs, they need another blood meal, so the mosquito, okay, lands on another person, and in the process of spitting their anticoagulant saliva into your cut to keep the blood flowing, they give you malaria. Yay, right? Or West Nile, or any number of nasty diseases. Okay. All right. Technically, we have 2 minutes left, and I want to talk about the epidemiological triangle and how we can stop transmission. Okay. All right. So we have in the epidemiological triangle, and we have host factors. Okay, for the purposes of this, I mean, go ahead and read in the textbook about the different host factors, but I'll be honest, I'm more interested in things like age. Okay, if you're very young or you're very old, your immune system tends to not be as good as for, say, young adults, okay, or even middle-aged adults. Okay, so age, okay, nutrition, stress, okay, immune status. Okay, if you have rheumatoid arthritis and you're taking a medication that suppresses your immune system, you're going to be more likely to get a disease than somebody who is not taking an immunosuppressive. Okay. Then there are environmental factors. Okay. So, for example, with Lyme disease, you are far less likely to get it here than you are back east. Okay. Because we don't have a bunch of trees that we're living in that have deer and mice in our backyard. Okay. So, location, okay, of the source / reservoir. Okay. But we're also more likely to get Giardia in this area. Okay. Also because of climate change, okay, pathogens are moving. Okay. Okay. You know, there's this kind of thing. Okay. And I'm going through this part real quick. And then there's the pathogen itself. Okay. So we've pretty well figured out, you know, what some of the etiological agents are. That's the fancy dancy word for the infectious agents that can cause a disease. Okay. But also, and we're going to be talking about this more next time we meet, but there's also a fun thing we call infectious dose. Okay. So how many of the pathogen do you have to have contact with to get the disease? If you get too few, your immune system can take care of it before you get disease. Okay. You get too many, it's more than your immune system can handle for most of us, and you get sick. Okay. So the goal of epidemiologists is to interrupt this triangle. Okay. So, you know, we keep track of where the reservoirs are and try to keep people away from them. Okay. Especially during particular times of the year. They close down Lake Low, okay, or Eagle Island when they see too high of a number of pathogens. Okay. Since it's the reservoir, we can't, you know, disinfect the lake, but we can keep people out of it. Okay. We can stop the pathogen through vaccination. And that can also go over here under host factors. Okay. We do our best for the vulnerable population, okay, to protect them from the pathogens. Okay. And that's where we get into healthcare. That's where we get into disinfection. Oops, and I'm spelling that wrong. Normally I can do that. Sterilization. Okay. And also vaccination and all of these things that we do to help break up this epidemiological triangle. Okay. All right, we had an excellent discussion, everybody. Let me go into very quickly. By the way, I'm going to have these questions in the practice quiz for this chapter, so you can practice with them, and I would give you more information on this. Oh, and make sure you watch the very entertaining video explaining, I think, the best way I've seen it so far, the difference between correlation and causation. It's the one about how ice cream can kill you. Okay, so for next time, read chapter 10. We're going to cover chapter 10 next time. Remember, exam 3 is open until this Saturday. Okay, and I have moved the due date for the signature assignment case study. Okay, back a couple of weeks. It seemed like we were
Thank you.
having, there was too much going on, and exam 4 is going to be coming around the corner pretty quick. So I've backed that up. Okay. All right. So any questions?
Yes. So when you were going through that, I saw Zika. Zika would be indirect transmission because it's transferred by mosquito, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
You got it. And the mosquito would be what kind of vector?
The mosquito would be a biological vector.
Very good. Yes, because it replicates within the mosquito. Yep.
Yes. And then my other question is not really related to like what we learned today, but for like the lab in this class, is the lab a separate grade, or do they merge together at the end of the semester?
It is a separate grade.
Okay.
Yeah. Back in the eons when I first started at CWI, they were together, and there are some biology classes where they are together and the grades are merged. But for microbiology, we don't do that.
Okay, thank you.
Quite welcome. Okay, other questions? All right.